Okay, this is the second lecture for River of Earth by James Still, still working in the first section, the first third of the text of the book. And I want to start on page 49 to note some key things here that will emphasize the theme of the book, some of the conflict of the book. So in this chapter, we have, the family, again, they're still together. They haven't moved to the coal camps yet, though that is sort of an overriding threat that's looming. They have these hens, these guinea hens, and they're taking care of these, and they're talking about the signs that the coal camps are going to open again, and the mines will open, and that the father will have work. So this occurs, during this conversation about the guinea hen. On page 50, the mother says, if we had us a cow, her udders would be tick-tight. Mother said it'd be a sight the milk and butter would get. So she's always looking at things that can go to enhance the farm life that she longs for. The father's response, Brack's response to that is, won't have a use for a cow at Blackjack, father said. I hear the mines are going to open for sure. They're stocking the storehouse, and it must be they get orders down from the big lakes. This time of year, they come, if they're coming at all. The big lakes, meaning the Great Lakes. So signs that the seasonal nature of the coal economy and the coal industry is about to turn, and that they'll start to have some orders for coal. And the thing, again, a thing about the coal industry has always been supply and demand. So the coal mines shut down during times of surplus. When there's a surplus of coal, they open up again when there's a need for renewing the surplus. And these are economic situations that the family, the workers, the miners have absolutely no control over whatsoever. So they have very little control over the fortunes of their own lives. Now on page 51, I want to read a couple of passages that will again illustrate the conflict that's going on. Alice had a mind to live on a hill, not sunk in a holler where the fog and dust is damping and blacking. I was raised like a lonesome place. Can't get used to a mess of women folks in and out, borrowing a dab and a pinch of this and that, and never paying back. Men tromping sod on the floors, forever talking brash. This is the mother talking. And she's describing what life in a coal camp is like, why she doesn't like it. She wants to be on the farm, and that is that sort of conflict that exists within this book between the idea of the farm life and the industrial life. Notions don't fill your belly nor quiver your back, the father responds. Mother was on the rag edge of crying, forever moving yon and back, sitting down nowhere for good and all, searching for God knows what, she said. Where are we expecting to draw up to? Her eyes dampened. Forever I've wanted to set us down in a lone spot, a place certain and enduring, with room to swing arm and elbow, a garden piece for fresh victuals, and a cow to furnish milk for the baby. So many places we've lived, the far side one mine camp, and next the slag pile of another. Hard Burley, Lizzie Blue, Tribby, I'm longing to set me down surely and raise my chaps proper. And part of what she's speaking to is just the indefinite nature of being tied to the mines and of having to move from coal camp to coal camp, depending on which mine is open at a time. Father's ears reddened. He spoke a grain angrily. It was never meant for a body to be full content on the face of this earth. Against my want, it is to be treading the camps, but it's bread I'm hunting, regular bread with a mite of grease on it. To make and provide, it's the only trade I know, and I work willing. So, that's again, the father speaking to his frustration. So there's not necessarily a right or wrong in either viewpoint. It's the circumstances. They're not, Brack and the mother and the father, they're not in opposition to each other because one is right and the other is wrong. They're just both trying to speak to the circumstances as best they can. I saw Walking John Gay once when I was a child, Mother said. Walking John Gay traipsing and trafficking, looking the world over. Walked all the days of his life, seen more of creation than any living creature. A lifetime of going, and he's got nowhere, found no peace. This figure of Walking John Gay, that's a sort of representative of part of the style that still has in much of his writing. Very often will have characters such as this that are depicted in such a way that they're almost out of some myth. They seem different, larger than life, as if there's some sort of a fabled idea. And that works well. Particularly, you'll see this in the final section of the text when they're in the coal camps, and some of the characters that the child narrator sees, and the way that he views them as being these larger than life, virtually magical types of people. Now, so they have these eggs, the guinea hen eggs, and they're waiting for them to hatch. And the mother, at the very last paragraph, says, "Don't touch a one," Mother warned, "or be blowing your breath amongst them. They'll be hatching soon. We can't move away to Blackjack till the young'uns pip the shells. Leastways not till then. It would be a pity." That's becomes somewhat of a strategy that she uses. There'll be another time later where she'll come up with some reason such as this. She'll voice some reason such as this to delay. We can't move to Blackjack just yet. We're waiting for this to happen. So she's always trying to delay, to give reason for them not to go. And that's the way that the conflict is voiced between them. There's never a great, huge argument that occurs. It's very subtle, the way that they will conflict with each other. Go past this next very brief chapter. A couple of brief chapters, and get into, this is about page 60, and this is some particularly compelling writing that we're going to see. We talked earlier, there's an earlier chapter where the father had been called to help with the foaling of a colt, and in this, his veterinary skills, his skills with animals, are brought to light again. And what I particularly want to show you in this chapter really is just the writing and the detail that Still uses just to show a process. This begins, "What's the real lamp?" Father said. "I can't see by this blinking lantern." Saul Hignight's calf had a cob in its throat, and he had brought it to our place in the bed of a wagon. He lifted it in his arms, letting it down onto a poke spread upon the ground. It was a heifer, 3 weeks old, with teat buds barely showing. So Saul Hignight, the neighbor, has bought this calf to the father. It has a cob, a corn cob. It's caught in its throat, and it's choking, or will choke. So what you're going to see, what I want to read to you, comes toward the very end of this chapter. This is a very brief chapter, page 64, where the father is actually doing the surgery on the calf. And this is just graphic, but the language is just so beautiful. It's lyric. and its quality. So I'll begin this with the surgery. The calf was turned to its right side, and the head lifted back. Mother reached the lamp to me, telling me how to hold it close and yet away from knocking elbows. Both hands under the bowl, she said. She caught the calf's head between her hands. Father dug fingers into the calf's throat, feeling the proper spot, seeking a place free of large veins. The blade flashed in the lamplight. It slid under the hide, making a 3-inch mark. Mother looked away when the blood gushed. It splattered on her hands, reddening them to the wrists. Yulie began to cry, softly and then angrily, begging Father to stop. "Begone," Father said. "You make a feller nervous." The blade worked deeper, deeper. The horror of it ran through my limbs. It shook me as a wind shakes a tree. The lamp teetered, jiggling the chimney. Tears ran from my eyes, dripping from my chain. I couldn't wipe them away for holding the lamp bowl. Father opened a space between the muscles of the calf's neck, steering clear of bone and heavy vein. That level of detail, the exactness of that detail. The calf made no sound. Only its hind legs jerked a bit. Fletch held to them, watching all that was being done and not turning a hair. At last, Father put the knife aside. He eased thumb and forefinger into the opening and jerked. The cob came out red and drenched. It spun into the dark. The calf fell back weakly, though beginning to breathe again. "Needle and thread," Father demanded quickly. Mother reached it to him. Father folded the inner flesh and sewed it together, and then stitched the outer cut. And having done all, he looked at Fletch and grinned. "Here's a feller would make a good doctor," he said. I handed the lamp to Mother so I could wipe away the shameful tears. The narrator, in his sensitivity, has been unable to watch the surgery. Recall that he had the same problem with watching the colt being foaled. But Fletch is the brother. Fletch is different in character. Fletch is much more like the father. He is able to see these things, to view these things. He has a different quality to him than the narrator. In the next chapter, beginning on 66, we have news that the mines are beginning to open. Collinsworth mine loaded its first gallon of coal the third week of June. Word came up the river, drifting into the creek hollows. Mother Coal Mine put 50 men to hauling fallen jackrock and setting new timbers. We heard that Father's cousins, Tib and Harl, were there. The Hamlin blew its steam whistle one morning at 3 o'clock. The blast shook Boone's Fork, crossed He Creek and She Creek, lifting into the hills of the upper Kentucky River County. All these names for these areas, they're so true to the nature of place names probably throughout Appalachia, but certainly in eastern Kentucky that I'm personally familiar with. These names just ring so true. And that's the insider's viewpoint. That's I guess we could call it regionalism. We haven't had a conversation that much on the idea of regionalism yet. They're wanting coal on the big lakes, Father said. It'll be going over the waters to some foreign country land. So the idea then that the opening of the mines is coming closer. This causes, of course, distress to the mother, but of course the father, is happy for this. And on page 69, Father came home in early afternoon. His arms were full of brown pokes. We ran to meet him, even Mother going down the pathway. We grabbed the pokes he carried, running ahead, shouting up to Mother, holding the bags aloft. We emptied them on the table. There's a 5-pound bucket of lard with a shoat drawn on the bucket. A shoat, of course, is a hog, if you're not familiar with that term. Brown sugar in a glass jar, a square of sow belly, thin rind, and Harry, a white dusty sack of flour, and on it a picture piece of a woman holding an armful of wheat straws. And there was a tin box of black pepper and a double handful of coffee beans. We looked in wonder, not being able to speak, knowing only that a great hunger stirred inside of us, and that our tongues were moistening our lips. The smell of meat and parched coffee hung in the room. "I'll start digging tomorrow," Father said, drawing himself tall and straight. He's proud of this, that he's going to be able to get back to start working. A lean hand reached toward the table, blue-veined and bony. Detail. It was Mother's, touching the sugar jar, the red-haired meat, the flour sack. Suddenly she threw an apron over her head, running away from us. She hardly made a sound, no more than a tick beetle. Notice that style there. Still is able to relate to us. Not only that the mother is distressed, but the degree of her distress simply through detail and actions. We don't have the authorial intrusion with James Steele. We don't have the author's voice or the narrator's voice coming into the story and saying, Mother was distressed by this. Mother was very upset by this. The author doesn't tell us, doesn't need to tell us. He shows us. That's the method that Steele works in. For my taste, for my reading, for what I appreciate in writing, that's the absolute best possible way to convey such things, the most effective way to convey such things. Resonates with the reader so much. Father lighted a fire in the stove. I fetched 3 buckets of water from the spring, not feeling the weary pull of the hill, not resting between buckets. The knobby heads of the guineas stuck above the weeds, potter-racking. It's a great word, potter-racking. It imitates the sound itself. The smell of frying meat grew upon the air, growing until it was larger than the house or the body of any hunger. Wonderful details. In the next chapter, page 71 by now, Father has received a letter, and so he has he has been told that he has a letter, and he has to go to the post office to get it. So the whole family goes off together to do this. And because there's going to be a preaching, and if you recall, well, even in John Fox Jr.'s Trail of Lonesome Pine, you had the idea of court days. One of those details that things that he knew all about, that he understood, and this is the same kind of thing. Decoration Day must be graveyard decoration day. You may, I don't know, if you're young, from Appalachia, from Eastern Kentucky, maybe this is something that you still know of, or certainly your parents or grandparents would know of such a thing as graveyard decoration day, what it means, and you might ask them, have you ever heard of this? If you're not already familiar with it. So graveyard decoration day, everybody would come, decorate the graves, but there would also be preaching. So throughout the year, there might not necessarily be preaching, but this would be a special event. There would be food, often referred to as dinner on the grounds. This might be a term that you've heard before. Ask your parents or grandparents, what's dinner on the grounds? So they go to this sermon, this preaching, and the preacher his name is Sim Moberly from Troublesome Creek. And Troublesome Creek, by the way, is a real place. Some of you may know of it. It's in Knott County. Runs through the county seat of Hindman. And it's in the preaching that we'll see something very significant to the novel. And Sim Moberly's style of preaching is in the style of, I would call it old regular Baptist, because that's how I know it. That's the term that I know for this style of preaching. And it's in this style of preaching, the preacher doesn't have a prepared sermon. It would be common simply for him to step up, to open the Bible, and let the sermon or the idea of the sermon come to him from wherever the Bible fell open. He would begin to speak, and after a while, he would get into the spirit of the sermon, and it's the idea that he is then speaking with the Spirit of the Lord. So it's a completely off-the-cuff, extemporaneous style, and it can get very, very animated and very exciting. So I'll read through some of this as this sermon progresses. I'm on page 74 at the bottom, at the end of the page. An elder stood in the pulpit. He was lean as a marten pole, thinner even than father. His cheekbones were large, angled from the nub to his chin. He lined a hymn, lining hymns, lining songs. You may or may not be familiar with that. So the elder would sing the words or speak the words of the hymn, and then the congregation would sing them back. That's what lining means. He lined a hymn, speaking the words before they were sung, holding the great stick of his arm in the air. Come, Holy Spirit, heavenly dove, with all thy quickening powers, kindle a flame of sacred love in these cold hearts of ours. The words caught into the throats of the hearers and were thrown out again, buried in the melody. The hollow under the ceiling shook. A wind of voices roared into the grove. The second verse was lined, the third. The elder raised on his toes, growing upward, thinner, leaner. Dear Lord, and shall we ever live at this poor dying rate? Our love so faint, so cold to thee, and thine to us so great. O God, have mercy! A moan came from where the black bonnets were. I rose on the bench, looking. I could see only the beak end of white noses bobbing out of dark hoods and fans waving before them. O God, sinner, I am, Lord. It's the idea there that there's these, not just a single voice, but what still is seeking to create here is the voice of the congregation. Different voices coming from different individuals, statements, words, expressions of passion, but creating a group voice. Okay, so the singing ended. A fleece of beard rose behind the pulpit, blue-white, blown to one side, as though it hung in a wind. A man stood alone, just describing the beard there, bowed, not yet ready to lift his eyes. He embraced the pulpit block. He pressed his palms gently upon the great Bible, touching the covers as though they were living flesh. His eyes shot up, green as water under a mossy bank, leaping over the faces turned to him. Brother Sim Moberly, Mother whispered. Yeah, this is the sermon. There's some key moments in this. I'll read the entire thing. The preacher raised a finger. This is being described here is the style of preaching that I described to you a moment ago. The preacher raised a finger. He plunged it into the Bible. his eyes roving the benches. When the text was spread before him on the printed page, he looked to see what the Lord had chosen. So he has just randomly put his finger into the text, and he will take from whatever verse that he has chosen, that has been chosen for him randomly, or chosen for him by the Lord. He began to read. I knew then where his mouth was in the beard growth. The sea saw it and fled. Jordan was driven back. The mountains skipped like rams, and the little hills like lambs. Tremble, thou earth. He snapped the book to. He leaned over the pulpit. I was born in a ridge pocket, he said. I never seed the sunball without heisting my chin. My eyes were sought upon the hills from the beginning. Till I come on the word in this good book, I used to think a mountain was a standingest object in the sight of God. It says here they go skipping and hopping like sheep, a rising and a falling. These hills are just dirt waves washing through eternity. My brethren, they hain't a valley so low but what it'll rise again. They hain't a hill standing so proud but it'll sink to the low ground of sorrow. Oh, my children, where are we going on this mighty river of earth? A borning, begetting, and a dying, the living and the dead, riding the waters. Where are it sweeping us? So he's chosen the verse, he read the verse, and then he just began with his inspired speech. We have embedded then in the sermon the actual title of the book. Where are we going on this mighty river of earth? You know, the title of the text, the title of the book, River of Earth. The question, where are we going? What does it mean to be alive in the world? You know, so it's the essential existential question. What's the purpose of life? And so that idea from which the book gets its title. A bottle knife cut into the seat behind us, chipping. A boy whittled the soft pine. The baby slept again, and Fletch's head nodded. The preacher seemed to draw farther away, melting into his beard. Presently his words were strokes of sound, falling without meaning on my ears. I leaned against Mother, closing my eyes, and suddenly Father was shaking me. He held the letter in his hands. He went out into the grove, walking toward home. A great voice walked with me, roaring in my head. Yes, the effect of the preaching. So, what's in the letter? So, maybe put a bookmark in that page. That might be something that you'll need to refer to again. That the sermon by Sim Moberly. So the letter is telling the father that Jolly has gotten in trouble. He's in jail again, and it's just sort of a usual thing with Jolly. Jolly is not a bad character. He's not a villain. He's not necessarily a criminal. He's the jokester, the guy that cuts the rusties on everybody. Gets in trouble. He gets in trouble. So he's more of a mischievous type of character, but he frequently finds himself in jail. Now, the next chapter we're looking at. Let's go. Couple of let's see. Yeah, go over a couple of pages. So I'm just skipping past the next very brief chapter, which is about 3 pages long, and into the next long chapter that begins on page 82. And throughout this chapter, we see the narrator and the other children in the community going to school. And school was not, in these days, in this time, the 30s, school was not necessarily a certain thing. Same thing with everything else. It came and went. When they had the opportunity for it, then they went, but the opportunity was not always there. So they've gotten a school here, and through much of this, we had just this wonderful description of this one-room schoolhouse with all of these children of different ages and different grades, and the narrator gets to be around other children and to talk to them, talk about what is learned through this. The teacher is this wonderful character. If you look on page 85, there's a place called South America over in Bell County. Now, it's the truth. This river is the Amazon. It's 167 miles wide at the mouth. I looked that word up in the dictionary, and it said Amazon was a fighting woman, river a woman. I didn't know which. Cricket throbbed dry and ripe came through the window, dull against Johnson's words, leaping over the room. He leaned from the pulpit, swinging his arms. Scholars stretched to draw numbers on the blackboard. 3 classes in arithmetic were going at one time. 3 threads of voices, intent as crickets. My feet hung from the bench, heavy as lead plums. My tongue is dried to a string, I told Leth. And Johns is the teacher. And one of the conflicts that occurs in this is that, Johns, he's trying to keep discipline over his students. And he punishes Johns Muldrow, who's B. Muldrow's son. And this causes trouble. And Johns is, B. Muldrow. I think I misspoke a minute ago. So Johns put B. Muldrow back in the 5th reader, Leth said, his voice husky with anger. He reared up, and Johns cracked him with a figure book. Johns is the teacher. Keep that in mind. I think I misspoke a moment before. Reckon B ought to be put back a grade, but I don't like to see nobody strike my kin. Uncle Hodge will give Johns trouble, sure. He thinks the sun riz in that B. So Uncle Hodge, B's father, he's going to object to the idea of this corporal punishment that Johns has inflicted upon B, and which was a common way of doing things. One of the things that happens in this chapter, the schoolhouse is Belfry is filled with bats, and they need to get rid of the bats. So one of the things that they do is they bring in sulfur to get rid of those. Page 91. When we reached the church house where the school is being taught, most of the scholars were there already. The older boys had mind lamps and carried snuff boxes filled with carbide lumps in hip pockets. The lamps smelt like burnt wool. Leth had a flambeau made of a rag stuffed in a bottle of coal oil. So essentially what they're going to do is just smoke the bats out. Now, the conflict with Johns having disciplined B. Muldrow is going to come to a head now. And I want to read some of this. It's on page 92, going on to 93. Johns saw Hodge Muldrow first. He came into the church house with B, standing there darkening the door, saying no word. We looked back, stretching from our seats. The grass crickets were suddenly loud above the hush. Johns came down from the pulpit, walking toward the door with the floorboards squeaking under his odd shuffle. He stood in front of Muldrow, his hands slightly lifted open. Muldrow spoke, and his words were filled with cold anger. They poured out of him like sluice water. I'm not going again, you reaching my boy back a grade, he said. What he learns, I want him got proper, but I'm again my boy being whipped. I do all the scourging from my house. Nobody's going to beat my chap and keep drawing breath. I'm running this place, Johns said, drawing pay to school, keep and whip as I see fitting. When a scholar goes against the rule, I'll not spare the rod. Muldrow spoke as though he had not heard, pushing Bee a little way toward Johns. I'm bringing him back to school, he said, but I'd better never hear of him being touched. I'd better never hear. He went out of the door, and Bee took a seat beside John Wynns, glancing about, hard-eyed and proud. Okay, so the conflict has been fully established. They smoke the bats out. The bats are gone. Bee acts up again. And Johns, of course, punishes him on page 96. Bee Muldrow put a bat on me, Yulee said. It bit my neck. Johns's eyes searched the room, lighting on Bee standing against the blackboard, edging toward the door. Johns sprang toward him, catching his sleeve as he crossed the threshold and pushed him toward the pulpit. He caught up a willow pointer and struck Bee sharply across the legs. Once, twice, and then Bee cried out in pain and anger, jerked loose, and leaped through a window. Johns stood awkwardly with Bee's torn sleeve in his hand. Okay, it's going to bring things to a conclusion. On 97, Hodge Muldrow came down the Cove Road, walking slowly, walking with his right hand in his hip pocket, wrist deep and bulging. Again, this is characteristic of Still's writing. The suggestion. He doesn't show Hodge Muldrow carrying a big rifle, like we would have seen in Trail of the Lonesome Pine. He doesn't show the gun at all, but he suggests to us, walking with his right hand in his hip pocket, wrist deep and bulging. What else could that be? That's suggestive to us. Still allows the reader to see this, to imagine. And for me, it's always that kind of writing is so much more powerful. Hodge came into the church house yard, bending a little to search the windows. We heard his feet clump on the front steps, the floorboards rub under his weight, and a pistol shot. I turned and ran down the creek road, sick with loss, running until there was no wind in my body. Yulee came swiftly behind, soundlessly as a fox runs. All we get is the sound of the gun. We get the situation. We don't see Hodge actually shoot, but we're left to infer. We're left to imagine that. We climbed the hill to our house, but that's not the ultimate tragedy. We climbed the hill to our house in early afternoon, standing breathlessly at the door, looking in at Mother, playing with the baby. I pulled the lid off my dinner bucket, and the bat soared out, swinging like a leaf in the wind. B-A-T, bat, Mother said. Think of this as an image. The bat flying out of the dinner bucket, the mother spelling the word bat. The detail of the bat escaping, soaring off, going off, becomes an image of education itself being lost, escaping from them. Very subtle. It's subtle. Naturalistic detail. Okay, I'll stop there for this particular video. Then that will conclude the first third of the book. And we're going to have now the second part. And in the second part, just to give you the idea of what's happening, the narrator is going to go live for a while with the grandmother to help out with her. That's not an uncommon thing that would have happened. If a family is having trouble taking care of all the children, potentially. They might send a child to live with another member of the family, a grandmother or an elder, for example. Not an uncommon thing at all. So this goes from about page 100 to page 165. You're probably already into this. And the next video I'll put up hopefully before too long, and I'll begin talking about this material. And in this section, well, we get, it's primarily just the narrator and the grandmother talking and interacting and living together. But we get a lot of the family history. So the narrator is educated about the family. And there's a lot of this wonderful detail about how they live and things that the narrator sees, observes, comes to understand, and of course there's more of Jolly. So the primary characters of the narrator, the grandmother, and Jolly take stage in this section. Then that will leave us with the third part, which involves life in the coal camp. And then that will conclude the text. So I'm thinking, probably shooting for being finished with Trail of Lonesome Pine by next week, and make the test available by the end of next week, I would think. So make sure that you're getting through the entirety of the text, and try to. It probably will help you if you read this second section before you get a chance to see the video lecture about that. Okay, so that's it for now, and more later.